All right, let's take a look at section 2.1. So this section is looking at fundamentals of integers. So kind of looking at some definitions, explanations, things like that. So first thing we have here is a definition of what an integer is. Okay, so an integer is a whole number. Could be positive, negative, or 0. Okay, so I mean, if I wanted to list some integers, I could have -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Right? So those are whole numbers. They could be positive, negative, or 0, and we call those integers. Okay, so what are some ways I can represent an integer? Well, I could do that by plotting these on, say, a number line. So how do I do that? So a number line, we draw a horizontal line, so like so. And we're going to use this to represent values of, say, x. So let me plot these integers. So let's say this corresponds with 0. Okay, so then I would count to plot the integer, say, -4. I have to move 4 places left since that guy's negative. So I have -1, -2, -3. Here's -4. So I'm going to indicate that with a dot here on the number line. So I've plotted the integer -4. Let me plot 0. Well, that's easy. 0 is already here. Let me put a dot there. Let's plot 2. So that's +2, so I go 2 units to the right. So here's the integer 2. And one more. Here's 6. +6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's 6. There's the dot, and let me label it. Okay, so I've plotted the integers, -4, 0, 2, and 6 on what we call a number line. Okay, so what's next? So here's some symbols that we use. You've probably seen these somewhere before, but you might benefit from a little review. So here we have some symbols. So this symbol means greater than. Okay, so I mean, what could I say? Like I could say, let's say 5 is greater than 4, for example. Okay, that's how I would use that symbol. And this guy means less than, so I would say like 3 is less than 10. Okay. This guy means greater than or equal. Okay, like, so I mean, I guess I could even use that symbol. I could say 5 is greater than or equal to 5, because actually 5 is equal to 5. Okay, so we're going to use these last two symbols more a little bit later. For now, I'd say we're kind of more focused on these first two. But I wanted to go ahead and give you the definitions of the others as well. So this is kind of scratch work. Okay, so as far as taking notes goes, let's see, I would make sure to include everything written here. And then, of course, here. It's up to you if you want to include the scratch work there that I erased or not. Okay, so now that I've defined these symbols, let's look at the example. Insert the appropriate inequality symbol to make a true statement. So these symbols here, they're called inequality symbols. So I could put that kind of here. These are called inequality symbols. Okay, so I'm looking at that list of symbols and I need to insert the appropriate symbol, okay? Now for these, we're only going to be looking at these first two symbols. Like I said, we'll get to the other two there later on. So we're really looking at the statement here and we're saying, okay, so what would I say? So is 2 greater than 5? No. 2 is less than 5. So the appropriate inequality symbol would be that one. Okay, look at the next one. 7, is 7 greater than 3? Yes, it is. 7 is more than 3. What about 6? 6 is more than 0. Another way to look at these, I mean, if it's helpful or if it's necessary, I mean, like you can look at a number line and you could say, okay, so like here's say 0. Here's 2. Here's 5. So you can see 5 is to the right of 2. So 5 is more than 2, or in other words, 2 is less than 5. So if it's helpful or if you want to, you can do a number line. But I mean, that's only if you want to, if you feel it's necessary. So like this one. Okay. Is 5 more than or greater than -1, or is it less than -1? Well, 5 is positive. A positive number is more than a negative number. Like think about if I had a bank account. If I had $5 in my account, that would be obviously more than if I had a balance of -1, right? If I owed $1. So 5 is more than -1. So again, if you wanted to, you could look at a number line. 1, 2, 3. Here's -1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's 5. So 5 is, of course, to the right of -1. 5 is bigger than -1. Versus -3. Again, if you find it useful, let's see. 1, 2. Here's -3. Here's 2. Okay, so -3 is to the left of, it's less than 2, but obviously, right? I mean, if I have a debt of $3, that means I have a negative balance of $3. Of course, that's less than if I had $2 in my account. A negative number is always less than a positive number. What about when I have two negatives? So I think about this like if I had a debt, okay? So let's see. If I draw out a number line, maybe that'll be helpful for these negatives. Here's 0, say. Here's -2. Here's -4. Okay, so one way I can look at this is I can say -4 is to the left of -2. In other words, -2 is more than -4. Okay, but that makes sense because if you think about it, if I only owe $2 versus if I owe $4, -2 is a smaller debt than, -4 is. Okay, so -2 is bigger than -4. Okay, so what about -1 and 0? So again, if I have -1, that's going to be less than if I have 0, okay? And you can also look at a number line if that's useful. So -1 is to the left of 0. -1 is less than 0. Okay. So if you want to include the number lines here, you can. If you kind of already know how to fill these inequality symbols in, it's okay to just go ahead and fill those in. here's the next little definition. The absolute value of a number A is written absolute value of A and is the distance from A to 0 on a number line. So these vertical bars around the variable or around the number, these mean the absolute value. Okay, so one way to think about these is to, again, use a number line. So we can do that. And then we can use the definition. So let's put 0 on here. So the first one here says the absolute value of 2. So here's 2, right? Okay, so if we read the definition, the absolute value is the distance from A to 0. So that means if I'm looking here, I'm saying, what is the distance from 2 to 0? The distance is 2. Okay, so the absolute value of 2 is just 2. Okay, that's very easy. So actually, if I have the absolute value of any positive number, like if I wanted the absolute value of 3, it would just be 3. Absolute value of 10 is 10. Because if I'm plotting a positive number on the number line, if I'm looking for the distance between that number and 0, it's just going to be the number itself. So I can write that if that's helpful. So I can say the absolute value of a positive number is just the number itself. So that makes it really easy. If you look at any of these where I have a positive number like this one, the absolute value of 123 is just going to be 123. Okay, it's only more interesting if I have, say, negative numbers inside. But even then, it's still not really too difficult. So I can still use my number line. So if I want to find the absolute value of, say, -1, let me do another little number line here. Okay, so here's -1. So remember my definition. The distance from that point to 0 on the number line. So what is that distance? The distance here is actually 1 unit, right? So the absolute value of -1 is +1. Let me try this other one down here where I have a negative. This one. We'll go back to 0, I guess. Let's look at this one. The absolute value of -10. Now let's put 0 here then. -10's all the way over here. Okay. Excuse me. So what is the distance from 0 to -10? The distance is 10. Okay, so I would say the absolute value of -10 is just 10. So let me move this over. So let me see, I'm gonna maybe move something. Let me just move this one down a little bit. I wanted to write, move that down just a tiny bit. I bet you'll have room. So what I wrote here, let's see, I wrote the absolute value of a positive number is just the number itself. So what about The absolute value of a negative number is, how should I phrase this? So, like the absolute value of -1 is +1. The absolute value of -10 is +10. So I want to say something like the absolute value of a negative number is the number, but positive. Okay, so in other words, if I have a negative number inside of an absolute value, the result will just be that number, but positive, right? So how does this apply? So look, the absolute value of -1 is +1. The absolute value of -10 is just +10. So look at this one. The absolute value of -250 is just going to be that number, but positive, right? It's going to be 250. Because it's a distance, right? It has to be positive. Okay, so that's this little definition. So in the notes, make sure you include these definitions along with your answers. Only one left is the absolute value of 0. Then that's kind of the easiest one because you might already know the answer just thinking about this. But look, here's 0. So this is saying, what is the distance from 0 to 0 on the number line? Well, the distance is 0, right? Because I wouldn't actually be moving. So the absolute value of 0 is just 0. That's the really easy one. Okay, so it's up to you if you want to include highlighting in your notes, but make sure you have everything written down there, including the definitions, the little explanations that I have over here. Okay, so here's another one of these problems where we have to insert the appropriate inequality symbol. So remember what those were. Those were either this one was the greater than symbol. This one was the less than symbol. So should I write that in? Let's see. So I think you should include these things here in your notes. So this one, remember, meant greater than. And this one over here meant less than. Okay? So when I'm looking at this first one here, it says the absolute value of -3. So I have to figure out if that's less than 2 or more than 2. So I probably want to simplify first. So remember the absolute value of -3. So that's the absolute value of a negative number. So do you remember how this works? Look up here. The absolute value of a negative number is just that number, but positive. So the absolute value of -3 is just 3. So I'm comparing 3 and 2. Oh, well, 3 is greater than 2, okay? So I would use the greater than symbol. So here's my answer. I could fill it in over here, if I wanted to. Okay, what about number 2? So -5, how does that compare with the absolute value of -7? So let me look at that absolute value. So the absolute value of the -7 is just +7. Okay, so how do those two numbers compare? So -5, that's negative. A negative number is less than a positive number. Okay, so then I could write it over there. I could write the symbol here. Either way. Here I have two absolute values. They're both negative numbers. The absolute value of -1 is 1. Absolute value of -4 is 4. 1 is less than 4. Okay. The absolute value of -2. The absolute value of a negative is just a positive. So how does 2 compare with 0? 2 is greater than. more than 0. And one more. The absolute value of 0, that's just 0. So how does 0 compare with negative 4? 0 is more than a negative number. Write the list of numbers in order from smallest to largest. So probably we have to start by kind of simplifying these numbers. I'll give you a minute to write these down here in your notes. And then we have to simplify, and then we're going to figure out what order these guys go in. Okay, so let me see. Let me start on the left here. So the absolute value of negative 3, that's 3. So I'm not ordering the numbers yet. I'm just simplifying. So should I write that? Should I write? So far, I'm just going to simplify. Okay, absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Negative 2 is already simplified. What is 3 squared? Do you remember how that works? 3 squared means I take 3 and multiply it by itself. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 is already simplified. Absolute value of positive 1, that one's really easy. That's just 1. So those are the numbers. Now I have to put them in order. Let's see what it says. It says put the numbers in order from smallest to largest. Okay, so for this, it seems like a number line might be helpful. Okay, so how I'm going to place these integers onto the number line. Maybe I'll make it even longer because I have 9 there. Let me put the number line here. Nice big number line. Okay, so let's see. Here's 0. All right, so I have 3. There's 3. Negative 2. 9. Here we go. 4. And 1. Okay, so now it's going to be really easy. And I have to write the list of numbers in order from smallest to largest. So starting on the left side and moving to the right. So my numbers in order, I'd have negative 2, 1, 3, 4, and then 9. Okay? So I'm kind of looking at this and I'm thinking, well, how should I answer the question? I mean, I've got these numbers in order, but I kind of think it might be nice to actually write these like in the format in which they were presented. So do you see? Let's see. So if I'm looking at let me see if I can fill in here on the number line. This would be kind of cool. Okay, so negative 2. If you look back at the original problem, here's negative 2. That's how it was presented. Okay, so that's just negative 2. Where did I get 1 from? That was the absolute value of 1. So like this was presented absolute value of 1. Where did I get 3 from? From here. This guy was the absolute value of -3. And then 4 was just plain old 4. Where did I get 9 from? 9 was 3 squared. Okay, because I'm thinking like, I think it would be cool to actually write our answer listing the numbers in the format in which they were presented. So you see, like, look, on the far left, I'm going to use a different color, I'll use this one. I have -2. The next number is the absolute value of -1. The next number, the absolute value of -3. The next one, 4. And then the next one, 3 squared. You see what I did? So that way, you see how I'm really writing the numbers, you know, how they're presented here. So -2, then absolute value of -1, then absolute value of -3, then 4, then 3 squared. So I think that's the way we should actually write our final answer here. Okay, let's see, I think a couple more. One more like that. Write the list of numbers in order from smallest to largest. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to say, all right, well, first I'm going to simplify. But I think what I'm going to do this time is I'm just going to write the simplified versions like below each number. Like, let me see, 12 divided by 3, that's 4. Absolute value of -5 is 5. 0 divided by 2, how does that work? That's like I have 0 cookies, there are 2 of you. How many cookies does each of you get? Each of you gets 0. If I have 0 in the numerator, the result is just 0. 2 cubed. That means I take 2 and multiply it by itself 1, 2, 3 times. So 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. And then what about 3 times 2? That's 6. Okay, now I'm going to make my number line. Nice, big, neat, clear number line. So, okay, how's this going to go? Let's see. Put 0 here. So, what are the numbers I need to plot? Well, I need to find 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But maybe I think instead of writing 4, let's go ahead and write that as 12 divided by 3. Okay, then what about absolute value of -5? That was 5. So where is that? 5 is here. Okay, 0, that was here. Should I label that as it was presented? 0 divided by 2? 2 cubed, that's 8. And then 6, 3 times 2. Okay, and then to write these out in order, starting from the left side and moving right. Okay, so farthest left I have 0, 0 over 2, then 4, 12 over 3, then 5, which was absolute value of -5, then 6, which was 3 times 2, and then 8, which was 2 cubed. So I've placed those numbers in order from smallest to largest. So make sure Chapter. All of that is included in your notes. Okay, find the value of each expression. This should be pretty easy then. Similar to what we've been doing. So, all right, what's absolute value of 2? It's 2. What's absolute value of negative 3? Positive 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. Okay, what's the absolute value of negative 4? 4, right? What's the absolute value of negative 2? 2. 4 minus 2 is 2. Here's one a little more interesting. So let's start inside the parentheses. So what's 12 divided by 3? 4. Okay. Okay, here I have 2 times negative 5. So if I'm $5 in debt, if I double that, then I'm $10 in debt. So 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. In other words, a positive number times a negative number is a negative number, right? What about this guy? I have this double absolute value. So let me start with looking at this. Let me go ahead and evaluate this inner absolute value. So the outer one here stays. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. It's going to look like that, huh? Don't forget to include the equal signs here at each step. Okay, then the absolute value of positive 4 is 4. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. 4 minus 10, let's see. If I have $4 and I spend 10, then I'm $6 in debt, right? Negative 6 plus 3. Working from left to right. Okay, now, all right, now I have that $6 debt, but I pay back $3. Then I'm $3 in debt, right? So there's my answer. So you should have all those steps included in your notes. Okay. And is that the last one? Cool. So we only got one more in our section, first section here. Okay, so let me start on the inside, working from the inside out. Okay. So I'm going to leave that absolute value and that negative. Okay, so look at the inner parentheses here. So look, 2 minus 5. So let me think about that. I have $2, I spend $5. Now I'm $3 in debt, right? Okay, let me see here. Let me again look at the innermost operation. So 3 times 4, 12, yeah? But I have that negative in front. Don't forget the equal sign at each step. That's scratch work there. Okay, now how does this work? So here I have a double negative. So do you remember how this works? So I have negative of negative 3. So a couple ways I can think about that. I can say, this says, another way of thinking about negative is the opposite. So this says the opposite of negative 3. The opposite of negative 3 is positive 3. Okay, that's kind of how I think about it. The other idea is like this. When I have this negative times this negative 3, that's the same as having a negative 1 times a negative 3. So here, do you remember how this works? When I have a negative number times a negative number, negative times negative. Do you remember what that is? A negative times a negative is positive. Okay, so positive 3. So either way you look at it, this inside is positive 3. Okay, what's the absolute value of negative 12? Let's go ahead and just do one step at a time here. Now let me do the absolute values. Absolute value of 3 is 3. Absolute value of negative 12 is 12. If I have $3, I spend $12. Now I'm $9 in debt. Okay. All right, so in your notes, you should have all of this part. You know, this part over here, this is scratch work. So this is kind of up to you. If you want to put this here in the notes, I guess I probably would. But you need to include at a minimum all of this over here, okay? All those steps, each line. And that's the first section.